The True Message of Jesus Christ Part 2. Authorship. According to biblical scholars, even the authorship of the Old Testament books and the Gospels themselves is in doubt. Torah. The first 5 books of the Bible, the Pentateuch, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers and Deuteronomy, are traditionally attributed to Prophet Moses. Orthodox Jews claim that the Torah, the Jewish name for the first 5 books, was created 974 generations before the creation of the world. According to them, God dictated the Torah during the 40 days Moses was on Mount Sinai, in such a final and invocable form that it feels sinful to claim that Moses wrote even one letter of it by himself. However, there are many verses within these books which indicate that Prophet Moses could not possibly have written everything in them. For example, Deuteronomy 34.5-8 states, 5 So Moses the servant of the Lord died there in the land of Moab according to the word of the Lord. 6 And he buried him in the valley of the land of Moab opposite Beth Peor, but no man knows the place of his burial to this day. 7 Moses was 120 years old when he died. His eye was not dim, nor his natural force abated. 8 And the people of Israel wept for Moses in the plains of Moab 30 days, then the days of weeping and mourning for Moses ended. It is quite obvious that someone else wrote these verses about Prophet Moses' death. Some Christian scholars have explained these discrepancies by suggesting that Moses had written his books, but that later prophets, as well as inspired scribes, had made the additions previously mentioned. Consequently, according to them, the text, in its entirety, remained an inspired scripture of God. However, this explanation did not stand up to scrutiny, because the style and literary characteristics of the interpolated verses are the same as the remainder of the text. In the 19th century, Christian Bible scholars began to debate the meaning of doublets that appeared in the Torah. These are stories which appear twice, each time with different details. Among these are the 2 versions of the creation of the world, of the covenant between God and Abraham, of God changing Jacob's name to Israel, and of Moses getting water from a rock. Who wrote the Bible, pages 54-70. Defenders of Moses' authorship said that the doublets were not contradictory, but instructive. Their intent was to teach us about the deeper, subtler meanings of the Torah. However, this claim was soon brushed aside by open-minded scholars who noted that, not only were some accounts clearly contradictory, but also that when the doublets were separated into 2 separate accounts, each account consistently used a different name for God. One would always refer to God as Yahweh Jehovah. This document was called J. The other always referred to God as Elohim, and was called E. The late 19th century German scholar, Julius Wellhausen, was the first to identify the multiple sources for the 5 books. There were various other literary characteristics found to be common to one document or the other. Modem linguistic analysis, according to Professor Richard Friedman. Richard Elliott Friedman is a professor in the University of California at San Diego. He earned his doctorate in Hebrew Bible at Harvard University, and is the author of the controversial work Who Wrote the Bible. Indicate that the 5 books of Moses are a mixture of Hebrew from the 9th, 8th, 7th and 6th centuries BC. Therefore, Moses, who was alive in the 13th century BC, was further away from the Hebrew of the Bible than Shakespeare was from the English of today. Further study of the Pentateuch led to the discovery that it was not made up of 2 major sources but of It was discovered that some stories were not only doublets but triplets. Additional literary characteristics were identified for these documents. The 3rd source was called P, for priestly, and the 4th called D, for Deuteronomy. The Interpreter's Dictionary of the Bible, Volume 1, p. 756, and Volume 3, p. 617. See also the New Encyclopedia Britannica, Volume 14, pp. 773-4. The extent to which less obvious additions were made to the original text is very difficult to determine. Consequently, a great shadow of doubt has been cast on the authorship of the books as a whole. In the appendix of the Revised Standard Version entitled Books of the Bible, the following is written concerning the authorship of over 1/3 of the remaining books of the Old Testament. Authors' books: Judges possibly Samuel, Ruth perhaps Samuel, 1 Samuel unknown, 2 Samuel unknown, 1 Kings unknown, 2 Kings unknown. 1 Chronicles unknown. Esther unknown. Job unknown. Ecclesiastes doubtful. Jonah unknown. Malachi nothing known. Apocrypha. More than half of the world's Christians are Roman Catholics. Their version of the Bible was published in 1582 from Jerome's Latin Vulgate, and reproduced at Douay in 1609. The Old Testament of the RCV, Roman Catholic version, contains 7 more books than the King James Version recognized by the Protestant world. The extra books are referred to as the Apocrypha, i.e., of doubtful authority, and were removed from the Bible in 1611 by Protestant Bible scholars. The Gospels. Aramaic was the spoken language of the Jews of Palestine. Consequently, it is believed that Jesus and his disciples spoke and taught in Aramaic. Aramaic is a Semitic language which gradually supplanted Akkadian as the common tongue of the Near East in the 7th and 6th centuries BC. It later became the official language of the Persian Empire. Aramaic replaced Hebrew as the language of the Jews. Portions of the Old Testament books of Daniel and Ezra are written in Aramaic, as are the Babylonian and Jerusalem Talmuds. Its period of greatest influence extended from 300 BC until 650 CE, after which it was gradually supplanted by Arabic. The New Encyclopaedia Britannica, Volume 1, p. 516. The earliest oral tradition of Jesus' deeds and sayings undoubtedly circulated in Aramaic. However, the 4 Gospels were written in an entirely different speech, Common Greek, the spoken language of the civilized Mediterranean world, to serve the majority of the Church, which was becoming Hellenistic Greek-speaking instead of Palestinian. Traces of Aramaic survive in the Greek Gospels. For example, in Mark 5:41, taking her by the hand he said to her, Talitha Kumi, which means little girl, I say to you, arise. And Mark 15:34, and at the 9th hour, Jesus cried with a loud voice, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, which means, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? Encyclopaedia Americana, Volume 3, p. 654. The New Testament Gospel of Mark, though considered by church scholars to be the oldest of the Gospels, was not written by a disciple of Jesus. Biblical scholars concluded, based on the evidence contained in the Gospel, that Mark himself was not a disciple of Jesus. Furthermore, according to them, it is not even certain who Mark really was. The ancient Christian author, Eusebius, 325 CE, reported that another ancient author, Papias, 130 CE, was the first to attribute the Gospel to John. Mark, a companion of Paul. The 5 Gospels, p. 20, and the New Encyclopaedia Britannica, Volume 14, p. 824. For references to various marks in the New Testament, see the following: Acts 12:12, 25, 13-5, 15:36-41. Colossians 4:10, 2 Timothy 4:2, Philemon 24, and 1 Peter 5:13. Others suggested that he may have been the scribe of Peter, and yet others hold that he was probably someone else. The same is the case with the other Gospels. Although Matthew, Luke and John are the names of disciples of Jesus, the authors of the Gospels bearing their names were not those famous disciples, but other individuals who used the disciples' names to give their accounts credibility. In fact, all the Gospels originally circulated anonymously. Authoritative names were later assigned to them by unknown figures in the early church. The 5 Gospels, p. 20. Books authors. Gospel of Matthew unknown. Although there is a Matthew named among the various lists of Jesus' disciples, the writer of Matthew is probably anonymous. The New Encyclopaedia Britannica, Volume 14, p. 826. Gospel of Mark unknown. Though the author of Mark is probably unknown, the New Encyclopaedia Britannica, Volume 14, p. 824. Gospel of Luke unknown. The Muratorian canon refers to Luke, the physician, Paul's companion. Irenaeus depicts Luke as a follower of Paul's Gospel. Eusebius says Luke as an Antiochian physician who was with Paul in order to give the Gospel apostolic authority. The New Encyclopaedia Britannica, Volume 14, p. 827. Gospel of John unknown. From internal evidence the Gospel was written by a beloved disciple whose name is unknown. The New Encyclopaedia Britannica, Volume 14, p. 828. Acts the author of Luke. The New Encyclopaedia Britannica, Volume 14, p. 830. 1, 2, 3 John the author of John. Ibid, Volume 14, p. 844. J. B. Phillips, a prebendary, a priest who receives income from the revenue of a church, especially a cathedral. Oxford Advanced Learner's Dictionary. p. 973 of the Chichester Cathedral, the Anglican Church of England, wrote the following preface for his translation of the Gospel according to St. Matthew. Early tradition ascribed this Gospel to the Apostle Matthew, but scholars nowadays almost all reject this view. The author, whom we can conveniently call Matthew, has plainly drawn on the mysterious. There are about 200 identical verses found in both Matthew and Luke, for example Matt 3:7-10 and Luke 3:7-9, Matt 18:10-14 and Luke 15:3-7, with no equivalent in either Mark or John. As a way of explaining this striking agreement, a German scholar hypothesized that there once existed a source document, which he referred to as a KL, German for source. The abbreviation Q was later adopted as its name. The existence of Q was once challenged by some scholars on the grounds that a sayings gospel was not really a gospel. The challengers argued that there were no ancient parallels to a gospel containing only sayings and parables and tacking stories about Jesus, especially the story about his trial and death. The discovery of Tiled Gospel of Thomas changed all that. The Five Gospel p. 12. Thomas contains 114 sayings and parables ascribed to Jesus. It has no narrative framework, no account of Jesus' exorcisms, healings, trial, death, and resurrection. No birth or childhood stories, and no narrated account of his public ministry in Galilee and Judea. The Coptic translation of this document, written about 350 CE, found in 1945 at Nag Hammadi in Egypt, has enabled scholars to identify 3 Greek fragments, dated around 200 CE, discovered earlier, as pieces of 3 different copies of the same Gospel. Thomas has 47 parallels to Mark, 40 parallels to Q, 17 to Matthew, 4 to Luke, and 5 to John. About 65 sayings or parts of sayings are unique to Thomas. The Five Gospels. p. 15, which may have been a collection of oral traditions. He has used Mark's Gospel freely, though he has rearranged the order of events and has in several instances used different words for what is plainly the same story. The Gospels in modern English. The fourth Gospel, John, was opposed as heretical in the early church, and it knows none of the stories associated with John, son of Zebedee. Since the late 18th century, the first 3 Gospels have been called the Synoptic Gospels, because the texts, set side by side, show a similar treatment of the life and death of Jesus Christ. The New Encyclopaedia Britannica, Volume 5, p. 379. In the judgment of many scholars, it was produced by a school of disciples, probably in Syria in the last decade of the 1st century. The Five Gospels, p. 20. Contradictions. Evidence for the unreliability of much of the material in the Bible can also be found in the many contradictions in the texts of the Old and New Testaments. The following are only a few examples. The Old Testament. 1. The authors of Samuel and Chronicles relate the same story about Prophet David taking a census of the Jews. However, in 2 Samuel, it states that Prophet David acted on God's instructions, while in 1 Chronicles, he acted on Satan's instructions. 2 Samuel 24. The numbering. And again the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel, and he moved David against them to say, Go, number Israel and Judah. I Chronicles 21. The numbering. And Satan stood up against Israel, and provoked David to number Israel. 2. In describing the length of a plague prophesied by Gad, and the Lord spoke to Gad, David's seer, saying, I Chronicles 21:91. According to this text, Gad was the name of Prophet David's personal fortune teller. The author of 2 Samuel listed it as 7 years, while the author of 1 Chronicles listed it as 3 years. 2 Samuel 24:13. The plague. So Gad came to David and told him, and said unto him, Shall 7 years of famine come unto thee in thy land? Or wilt thou flee 3 months before thine enemies, while they pursue thee? I Chronicles 21:11. The plague. 11 So Gad came to David, and said unto him, Thus saith the Lord, choose thee 12 either 3 years famine, or 3 months to be destroyed before thy foes, while that the sword of thine enemies overtaketh thee. 3. In 2 Chronicles, Jehoiakim was described as being 8 years old when he began to reign, while in 2 Kings he is described as being 18 years old. 2 Chronicles 36:9. The age. Jehoiakim was 8 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 3 months and 10 days in Jerusalem, and he did that which was evil in the sight of the Lord. 2 Kings 24:8. The age. Jehoiakim was 18 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned in Jerusalem 3 months. And his mother's name was Nehushta, the daughter of Elnathan of Jerusalem. 4. The author of 2 Samuel described the number of Syrians who died during a battle with Prophet David as being 700, while the author of 1 Chronicles gave their number as 7,000. 2 Samuel 10:18. The Dud. And the Syrians fled before Israel, and David slew Taman of 700 chariots of the Syrians, and 40,000 horsemen, and smote Shobach the captain of their host, who died there. I Chronicles 19:18. The Dud. But the Syrians fled before Israel, and David slew of the Syrians 7,000 men which fought in chariots, and 40,000 footmen, and killed Shophach the captain of the host. Although some may say that the adding or dropping of a 1 or a 0 is not significant, as it is only a copying mistake. Here that is not the case because the Jews spelled out their numbers in words and did not use numerals. Such discrepancies cannot be accepted as part of a divinely revealed text. Moreover, they prove the fallibility of the human authors and further prove that the texts of the Old Testament were not divinely preserved.